G'day folks, all new weekly update, albeit a very late weekly update. I did get back on schedule last time. This time, not so much. I'll talk about what I've been doing in a moment. Better late than never. I'll try and sort the Friday one out in time. All right, so what have I been doing? Last time I did this, I was in Norway. I did that, just feels like so long ago already because I go to so many different places in between. I think I did that sitting on a terrace of an Airbnb. And the weather was just turning. It was like, all right, done with Norway. The winter is impending. So I went to Denmark, which frankly wasn't much better in terms of the weather. I went over to, I've got to get their names right now. And Danish people are going to reply to this and go, no, you didn't get that right. I went to Aalborg. So you didn't get it right. On Monday, I did a talk there on Tuesday for the STEAM conference. And that was a really fun talk actually. I was on it was like a reverse stage. So like picture like an auditorium or something. There's a stage, and normally a speaker will be up there, and then all the people like down there, and they look up at you. And if you've not been on the stage, you've probably been in the audience before, so you know what I mean. And they kind of reversed this, where they had the stage, they put all the people on there because it was like a really, really long stage, and then they built another like fabricated stage where the people would normally be, and I was up there. And they had all these cool lights and things like that. So it was actually a really nice setup. That was the KMD STEAM conference in Aalborg. I did my Rise of the Breaches, the cyber one, about all the different data breaches that are happening, some of the interesting things that we have been seeing over the years. So I did that on Tuesday. I caught a train down to Aarhus, the other place in Denmark. Did again. Did that on Wednesday. We did an NDC meetup there. NDC will be running in Copenhagen next year. Don't quote me on it exactly. I think it is around about the April timeframe. So this was a little bit of airtime for those guys. Did a free meetup there. We had a bunch of people turn up for that one. Meetups are fun because it's a similar sort of talk, but it's a bit relaxed. Like I normally have my timer running, right? I got this little timer that times it down to the minute. So like when I did the KMD Steam one in Aalborg the night before, it's like, okay, I'm going to talk for 43 minutes, and I run the timer and I run it like literally down to within 60 seconds normally. This is why I make it 43 minutes instead of 45, buffer, see? So they're really strict. Once I do a user group though, it's like, it's relaxed, and it's partly relaxed because not only do I do the talk, but then I do a bunch of Q&A. So normally it's like a 1 hour talk for argument's sake, and then a 45-minute or an hour Q&A. And the Q&A is fun as well because it is then interactive. And for me, it's interesting because I just don't know what I'm going to get. Occasionally I get some pretty crazy stuff. I can't even say one of the comments that I got in an event recently that was enormously awkward, not because of the way it was directed at me, but because of what's the right way of putting this? The social tolerance of the way the person said this. I've not seen that before. If you have beer with me at some time, this is definitely a beer discussion. It is not a discussion I'm going to put on YouTube. So anyway, did Uhaus, the other one. Then went down to Copenhagen and did a meetup in Copenhagen as well at the Microsoft building there. In fact, this was the third one I've done at Microsoft in Lyngby. We did it again as another NDC meetup to promote the NDC things that will happen in Norway. Will happen in Norway too. It happened in Denmark next year. And the Microsoft auditorium there is actually super cool. In fact, when I did it last year, I did it in January, on January 26th last year. And I remember it was January 26th because that's Australia Day. And because it was Australia Day, they had Aussie flags everywhere, and it was all very nice. So I did that, and that was a really, really nice event as well. So yeah, thank you for everyone that came along to those. I don't have any more meetups, I think, on the calendar at the moment, but there will definitely be many more in the future. So I'll keep putting those on my schedule as I get to them. Did that, came over to here, to Budapest. Now, for those of you, we'll see if this works or not, for those of you actually watching the video, if I kind of pick that camera up and point it out the window, out there is the Danube and a building which I'm not quite sure what it is, but it looks pretty epic. So someone will probably tell me that. I might tweet a photo of that later because that is a really cool looking building. So I am now here in Budapest. It's my first trip to Hungary, and I got in last night. Obviously everything was dark, but the way all the buildings and everything were lit up and the bridges were lit up actually looks pretty epic. So I'm going to get a little bit of time to have a look around the Savo, which will be good. I'm spending all day tomorrow at Microsoft, and then I've got commitments at the ITBN conference on Wednesday and Thursday. So I'll be doing a keynote on Thursday for ITBN, which will be fun. Also about data breaches. So there's a pretty predictable theme stretching across all of these talks. So that'll happen this week. Now, on a few other things, and this won't be a particularly long one because, again, this is very late, but better late than never. So, a few little things here. Now, this week I tweeted some stats about the Have I Been Pwned API. So this is the API where you now buy for an entire $3.50 an API key. Now, a couple of things on buying this API key, just while I'm actually loading up the tweet that I put in here so I get my figures right. I've had a few people say, in fact, it's quite funny that there's sort of two ends of the extreme here. I've had people say, can we buy a 1-year key because our enterprise makes it hard to buy like a 1-month key? And look, I'll keep taking that on board. Like, maybe that makes sense. I'm a little bit reticent to do anything too long term at the moment, as Have I Been Pwned. Still going through this acquisition process, still progressing, by the way. There's just a ridiculous amount of work going on in the background. I'll talk about more of that when I can talk about that. So a little bit reticent to put in changes that sort of then apply for the long term. But also, it's freaking $3.50. Like, honestly, and I say this having been you, if you're the person asking this, being the person in a large organization trying to get some stupid small amount of money paid. So I feel your pain, push it back to the organization and go, for God's sake, guys, it's $3.50. Like, work this stuff out. So that's the one side of it. The other side of it is I've had a few people say, can I get a free trial? It's $3.50. And before someone gets really upset that in like the Ivory Coast or somewhere, $3.50 is a lot of money, I appreciate that. It's not exactly a, what's the right way of putting this without sounding bad? It's not a market where a lot of people come from to use Have I Been Pwned. I know where the demographic is. And it's basically Australia, the US, the UK, bits of Europe, and a tiny little bit in the rest of the world. So places where $3.50 is not much. I still don't think I can get a decent coffee in any of those places for less than $3.50. So for someone saying, can you please go and give us a free trial or set something up or take time out of your day in order to save us less than a cup of coffee, nice latte, probably not. That's probably not going to happen. Anyway, and of course, then I'd just have the same problems as before as well, which is like if there was free trials, then people who would not have to go through the identity verification process, which is actually providing a credit card and going through that barrier to entry, would then use it in patterns which I'm not comfortable with. So that would kind of be self-defeating for the whole point. I put it in there, it's $3.50. So, got that off my chest. That said, looking at some figures I tweeted yesterday, really good news on two fronts. And I think I've said this before, but as time goes by, it just becomes even more obvious. So number one is that I'm no longer seeing any abusive patterns. And absolutely positively, no shadow of a doubt, not a lie, I'm not seeing any use of the API that makes me feel uncomfortable, which is very contrary to the way it looked before. So number one, super awesome. Number two, I've not had a single report of a false positive block. Now, false positive block would be, for example, someone's ASN has been blocked, or their country has been blocked because they suddenly accounted for like 97% of the API traffic, even though it's about sub 1% of all users who actually use the API. So stuff like that has gone away, which is super, super awesome. Non-false positive blocks are things like you've exceeded the rate limit or your API key has expired. That's meant to happen that way, so that's fine, I'm cool with that. So, super happy with all that. Now, the figures just here, this is a 24-hour time window. So again, keeping in mind that these are all really super legitimate use cases now. I did a little snap here of the 200 responses versus the 400 responses. So inevitably an HTTP 200, okay. That is a result has been found and returned. A 400 response is pretty much always a 404. It's 99.7% of the time is going to be 404, i.e. the record search for, the email address search for does not exist in the system, has not been pwned. 509,200 responses, 492,400 responses. So, headline figure there is more than 1 million requests over 24 hours. You'll see it's actually a pretty stable graph too. And the other thing is that more searches than not actually return a result as well. So more than half the people that have been searched for have been pwned, which is alarming, I guess. It's not particularly good news, but it's nice to see the whole thing is working the way it's intended to work. So that's the have been pwned usage stuff. Now, something else I'm going to link through to, because I think it's actually a really interesting discussion. This has consumed a lot of my Twitter feed this week, and it is about someone getting locked out of their PayPal account because they enabled 2FA and then they lost their authenticator app, or they didn't restore it when they got a new phone. Now, in multiple different ways of looking at this, which I think is really fascinating in terms of human-computer interfaces, usability, security, the trade-off of all these things, etc. And the first thing that came to mind is this person was basically saying PayPal needs to try and get them access back into their account. And I'm sort of saying, hang on a moment, like you went to PayPal and you turned on 2FA. Now, just so that we don't all argue about it, 2FA, MFA, multi-step, I don't care. We all know what we mean. I've got an entire blog post on the difference between them. So this person turned on 2FA, and when they turned it on, they said, I would like to make sure that if someone has my username and my password, but not my authenticator app, I don't want them to get into my account. Now, then they lost access to their authenticator app. They've now turned around to PayPal and said, I have my username and my password. Can you please get me access to my account? Now, from PayPal's perspective, it's someone saying, I have a username and a password that belong together. I don't have the authenticator app for it. Can you please get me into that account? And they're going, well, how do we know that you're not the person that, or you are the person that you say you are? And then you go down this rabbit hole of doing very manual human-based identity verification processes in a fashion which gives PayPal enough confidence that they are actually the person that they say they are. So I find that a little bit ironic there. Now, there are nuances in this discussion here where the person said, look, PayPal should have given them recovery codes. So for something like, say, Report Your RI, we give you recovery codes so that if you do lose your authenticator app, you have the recovery codes. The problem then, from a very philosophical standpoint, is that recovery codes are something that you know, right? So they're not something that you are, they're not something that you have in terms of physical devices, something that you know. The password is something that you know. The username is something that you know. So now you're basically back to, for all intents and purposes, one factor, where you're saying, I know the username, I know the password, I know the recovery code, get me back in. It's no longer 2FA. Now you could call it multi-step, and this is where we get into these sort of nuances of the nomenclature. But you see the problem here. Now this person also said, look, it is basically easy for them to make this mistake. And I'm sympathetic to them because it is easy. I've seen it happen to family members before. It is easy to do because there's a lot of stuff to try and remember. Which brings me to my next point, which is that the usability of 2FA or any of the other acronyms you might want to use sucks. Like, it is a hard problem. Now, that is an issue for adoption rates. Dropbox in the past has said, look, we've got like a 1% adoption rate, and the adoption rate is so low because the experience sucks. They don't want to push it too much higher because their experience sucks when people keep losing their recovery codes and their authenticator app and they can't get back in. So support costs and things go up through the roof. So 2FA, as much as I love encouraging people to use it, there's sort of two kind of ironic issues with it. One is that the people that are savvy enough to use 2FA in the first place are going to be people who are more likely to do things like use password managers with strong, unique passwords. Ergo, they're going to get less benefit from 2FA as compared to the person who uses the same crappy password everywhere and they've just been credential stuffed. So that's the first part of it. And the second part of it, again, comes back to this usability problem, which is that it's a really hard process to take people through a lot of the time. Like take a non-technical significant other, or take your parents or something like that, and try and walk them through the 2FA setup process on many different services, and then explain to them not only how to get access to their account, but what to do if they're using, say, an authenticator app and they lose it. And then you go, okay, well, what about SMS? And then people lose their minds because they say SMS, you get SIM hijacked. Now, having said that, a username, a password, and SMS is always going to be better than just a username and a password. There are actually some people who don't seem to think that. And I wonder why. I think they're kind of missing the fact that it is always something extra having SMS, even if it's not as strong as what we'd like it to be. The upside of something like SMS, at least, is that so long as you have your phone, or let's rephrase that, so long as you have access to the phone number, and there's always a way of getting that back, then you solve the problem of losing the soft token, or even if it's a hard token or a U2F key, which you could possibly physically lose the thing as well. If you take nothing else away from this discussion, recognize the fundamental challenges there are in getting broad 2FA adoption. I think that was a really interesting takeaway. Now, I did blog during the week as well, which is good because I haven't done a lot of blogs lately because it has been kind of busy, if I'm honest. Now, this blog was one of the ones that I'd had in draft for quite a while, and the title of it had been there for quite a while, like probably about a year. The title of it had been there for quite a while too. The title is Banks, Arbitrary Password Restrictions and Why They Don't Matter. Now, what I really want to do with this blog post was to try and argue the thing two different ways. And I think from memory, I started this in draft just after I'd spent a day actually at a bank in Australia, and I'd spent time talking to the CISO, and I'd asked him a question that was related to feedback that I was seeing on the internet about their password policy. And effectively, what it boiled down to is there are some, let's call them suboptimal password policies on a lot of banks. Limiting the character length to a short arbitrary limit. So 16 characters, for example. Very often a lot less than that. The tweet that I've got at the start of this blog post talks about needing an exactly 5-digit password manager. So not just a limitation in length, but a massive limitation in character type, i.e. they got to be numbers. So that's not so good. So there's that side of things. Now, on the surface of it, that looks bad. But I wanted to argue the fact that in a way it doesn't matter, but it's still bad and they shouldn't do it. And this is really sort of an exercise of saying, can we see both sides of this picture? Now, obviously, there's a reason banks do this. There are probably upsides for banks. There must be something behind this. It's not just a decision that's made with no conscious thought whatsoever. Banks do put a lot of thought into security. On the other hand, there's then the optics of it. And what I sort of argue about here is, look, with banks, first of all, you're not just stream matching. It's not an email address and a password or a username of some kind or a password. Do they match together? Yes, bang, the person gets in. There's a lot of other stuff that goes into the verification of the user that banks do behind the scenes. They're not going to tell you what they are. Now, this is one of the problems that came across in the comments. People are like, so what, the bank just tells us that there's all these other security controls, they won't tell us what they are, and we just have to trust them. Yeah, great, they should tell us. And someone actually made the comment, yeah, they should tell us. Of course, that would then weaken the controls because other people would know how they work and they'd have a better ability to circumvent them, but they should tell us anyway. And it's like, well, which one do you want? Do you want like the more security or do you want the transparency? Someone also suggested security through obscurity. Now, I can see where they're coming with that term, but very often that term implies things like, I'll give you a really good example. I'm going to put our database back up on a publicly facing website somewhere, and I'm going to give it a file name that people won't guess. Look, that is stupid. It's a very different proposition to say there are controls that work in certain ways that detect fraud and anomalous behavior in certain ways. And they are going to look at, in many cases, lots of little nuances of the way authentication happens. We're not going to tell you what they are, because if we tell you what they are, you're going to be in a much better position to circumvent them. So you've got to be able to see that side of it. That's not just security through obscurity for the sake of doing something crappy and hoping to get away with it. There's actually really good fundamental reasons why a bank wouldn't disclose that. So there's that side of things. There's also bits in here around the likes of banks saying, look, I've got some embedded tweets here. If your account gets compromised, we will refund any money that gets taken as a result of that. So that's not the sort of thing you get with a lot of other online accounts. Banks will do this sort of thing. Banks will often level up security based on risk profiles. I recently signed up with a new bank. When I make a payment to a payee that I haven't paid before, I have to go through an additional verification process beforehand. So someone could get into my account if they knew my username and password, but it would be harder for them to actually do anything with the money. So it's a very non-binary state. It's not like you're not logged in, you can't do anything. You are logged in, you can now do everything. It's not how it works. Now, arguing on the flip side, banks shouldn't impose password limits. One of the first points I make here is that one of the very, very few publicly facing independent measures that we can apply to any online organization security posture is password strength criteria. The other is whether it serves our HTTPS and then what their TLS implementation is like. Using things like SSL Labs, you can see that. Plus, of course, you can go and use things like Scott Helm securityheaders.io and see that kind of stuff. But passwords are certainly the one that really faces the masses and they can easily see. So when you go to a website and the website has some crazy inane set of rules about what the password can be, what do you think people think? Particularly people like you and I think. It's not a good impression. And people are often going through going, 16 character password limit must mean you got a varchar 16 in the database. Now, probably not for a bank, but I can see how you would draw that conclusion. So that's a publicly facing thing. Now, of course, the other thing that's popped up a few times here as well is things like blocking the password managers. Just don't ever do that. Don't ever block password managers. Oh my God. It's such a painful thing. 1Password's actually got a page which is like an open letter to banks appealing to them not to do that. So I linked to that in this blog post. I wrote a big long blog post about the Cobra effect, that is blocking paste on passwords. I got in trouble for that recently as well. Someone was really unhappy with the term Cobra effect because apparently that's like British imperialists, which is the first time I've heard a negative connotation behind that in the many, many years that have passed since I wrote the blog post. But anyway, it's the internet. People are going to get upset. So, where I sort of got to there, and I'm a little bit surprised actually how much engagement this got, but I sort of got to the point where I went, look, banks shouldn't do this, but I would never, as some people have suggested, leave my bank because I wasn't happy with the password criteria. It's not a good look. There's a lot more to it than that. They're not going to tell you all the other things that are in it. Just try and see both sides of the story. A little bit of objectivity there. Blog post had 84 comments on it, a bunch of chatter online. Quite a few people got a bit upset with me, just going, how can you condone? I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying they should do better. We should hold them to account. We want them to do better, but also appreciate that there is a lot more to it than just the password itself. All right, so last thing, sponsorship this week, the week that has already passed, but also this week that I'm currently in, so I can give them another plug on Friday, is Okta. Okta's been around on my blog for a while now. They're still talking about don't roll your own hashing algorithm, or let me rephrase that. Okay, first of all, don't roll your own hashing algorithm. Second of all, you wouldn't roll your own hashing algorithm, would you? So don't roll your own auth. The joy of using a service like Okta is you delegate away the auth to someone else. Let someone else figure out how to store passwords, manage the rate limits, do password complexity. Hopefully they won't do that like some of the banks. Take care of all the other things that go into an authentication scheme, not to mention all the coding and effort and testing and all that, let alone the security side of things. So hand it over to Okta. You can go and secure users in minutes with a free dev account as well. Free accounts are great for trialing these things. I know I just said I don't do that. Have I been pwned API for free? You know there's other reasons for that. The Okta one you can definitely go and use for free and you can get started very quickly. So go and give Okta a go if you're thinking about writing an authentication scheme. At least give it a shot before you go and try and write the whole thing on your own. Trust me, you do not want to take responsibility for that. So that has been this week, which was last week. I'm going to try and pump this out as fast as I can now. Get up on YouTube. I will come possibly from here at the end of this week, maybe from somewhere else. I'm going to see how my schedule goes. So thank you very much for watching again. And I'll see you from wherever it's going to be in maybe only 4 days from now. See ya.